I thought, well, the first thing would be to develop a model, a framework in which people can look at what changing their belief system actually means, because it's easy to see that. But what is the foundation for that? What is the foundation for being able to actually observe your belief system and step back? I think there are certain practices that people can do, like, for example, recommended by the lady that came on my podcast previously, was meditation, which gives you that step back. And I know you love practicing meditation too.
I do, and I like to differentiate with what meditation is, because in the in Western culture, our understanding of meditation is actually hypnosis. When you sit there and you think about the things that you want to manifest in life, that's not meditation. That's hypnosis, and it works. Hypnosis works. Don't
Yeah,
get me wrong.
I had Pete on my show earlier from Australia. He was a hypnotherapist, so he said the same thing. So that's pretty cool. Go on.
Yeah, so like hypnosis works if you want to position your mind in a certain way, or you want it to do certain things for you. And let's say you're going to start your dopamine detox and you just want to get all the stimulation out of you and just focus on rewiring yourself, then yeah, hypnosis is a very effective tool for getting yourself and your mind to basically, you're molding it a certain way. But with meditation, you're walking away from the identity that your mind has given you. And even though your mind is still going to be talking and it's still going to be chattering and
The
giving
body's
you an
not
identity,
identified with it.
right? All you have to do in that moment is
Liberation.
just listen and observe. You're not being asked to judge your mind. You're not being asked to judge anything. Don't worry about defining anything. Don't worry about understanding anything. Meditation is the moment where you just don't care about understanding anymore. You detach from needing to understand everything that's happening to you. Detach from the idea that you need to understand life, that you need to understand what your next step. Just detach and let things play out. And if your meditation is successful, it'll come full circle where you realize, oh, I didn't need to meditate in the first place. And that's how
Yeah,
you know your
I've gotten
meditation
to
was
that point now where
successful.
I don't usually meditate. I actually don't meditate anymore. I do. You know what? When I do, it's really intense. If I ever do it, even after like 1 year, if I do like 5, 10 minutes meditation, it's really damn intense.
Yeah, you probably noticed that within that period that you didn't meditate, you took on a lot of new things. And once you meditate for the first time, it stays with you. So when you meditate again, you can easily identify all of these things that have anchored themselves onto you, and you can just observe and listen to them and detach.
Yeah, psychedelics, I believe, do the same thing in a different way, because of course you have an external agent, chemical agent in the brain, kind of also working on your serotonin receptors, tryptamine receptors, dopamine receptors. So but meditation seems to be very practical for every single person. I think a lot of people get different kind of different realizations from meditation, I would say, based on where they're at in their life. Because I believe, like you said, consciousness is a continuously evolving type of mechanism in the human experience, and people's level of consciousness is all going to be different based upon, factors such as what has their experience been, and
How
how's
deeply
their brain
integrated,
developed.
right? And how deeply integrated are they in current life?
So, with that being said, I want to talk about synchronicity, because this is kind of just strike my mind now. How do you think? So, once you become more conscious, do you believe you begin to synchronize more with reality? What is going on in the collective unconscious, collective
I,
conscious?
I do think so, because when you look at it, can we truly understand the inner workings of the universe? And in my honest opinion, I don't think we can. And specifically understand, but we can observe it. We can see it and kind of identify patterns.
Yeah, I've always been like, it's that type of thing where you're like, am I overthinking too much? Am I kind of developing something that may possibly be seen as a delusional way of looking at the world by thinking everything is synchronizing? But as life has gone on, as I've gotten older, as I've been through more, I believe that is really happening. Like, it's starting to become ridiculous. Like, the same numbers, like I always see 333 appear, number synchronicity, just certain events that happen, and this is starting to become every day. So as I began to, become more consciously aware, you begin to notice the synchronicity more and more, because part of your existence is coming into line with where you should be. where the mysteries of the universe is meant to be taking you. And that's something I haven't been able to explain. What do you think?
Um, so when I read the Tao Te Ching, it touches on this where it's basically you can become aware of your experience. You can become aware to a degree where you have an explanation for almost everything, but that's also a double-edged sword because it's like you're becoming so self-aware and so conscious to the point that you begin to get in the way of your own existence, if that makes sense, where you start to overthink everything. And I kind of went through a period of that overthinking and just analyzing the shit out of everything, but then you realize that the things that are aligning you with the inner workings of the universe, they're very simple moments. They're very small. They're very basic, but you kind of just pick up a pattern in that moment and you're like, ah, and you just continue from there. Something as
Yeah,
simple as like numbers lining up. You see numbers line up before, like when you first started to see this, you start to wonder, like, what is it that is lining up? Like, I need to find out. I need to tell someone. But as you go on, you realize, like, oh shit, okay. And then you just continue.
yeah, exactly. That's what it's come to now, and you've just started. They became that acceptance of synchronicity with time. And so what I want to get into with this being said is I think synchronicity really is once you become more aware is really about where people find their purpose, because people ask, what is my purpose? What is what am I supposed to do? I think as people synchronize more, they understand where they're meant to be in the world and what they're meant to be doing. But purpose has been taken out of context a lot by these coaches and whatnot. You need to do this. You need to hustle. You need to get money. You need to. I don't know what type of coaches you've come across that teach
They're
purpose.
they're they're very much the same, and that's just capitalism ingrained in our minds, ingrained in our biases. Where when we try to perceive life without it, it kind of doesn't even register. And so you have all of these coaches who are whatever they're saying that they are. They might be spiritual, they might be development, they might be wellness coaches, but they still exist within the paradigm of capitalism and the systems that we've been indoctrinated with in order to survive in this landscape. So they're going to continue operating from that mechanism until they exist in a different environment that doesn't require them to basically try to sell something to you or try to tell you that growth and productivity is the only thing that matters. And that's more of a reflection of them.
Well,
And it
yeah,
just
it's
lets,
it's a projection of their subjective reality, but also you have to remember that they are trying to apply a value system that
right,
is
right.
projecting
Yeah,
their own
they're
success, projecting their own success. That's the best way.
basically right. They're validating their own experience by fashioning their mirror in their image. And that quote came to me from someone who told me that the easiest way to tell if someone is disconnected from the patterns of life is if they're trying to fashion everything in their image.
Yeah, because that is actually a form of, I mean, it's a form of narcissism in a way. What is a form of narcissism? Because you pretty much, it's what is narcissism? It's seeing the image in the mirror, right, and presenting that constantly, but to the world, to the world, no mirror. You're just presenting that outwardly to the world and expecting them to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I came to realize was that you will you will need to be able to just integrate those fundamental patterns of what you've been told from a young age of what purpose is, of what you need to do. I had that biggest disconnect going to university, because once I realized, like, hey, this is the narrative I'm living based upon what the projection of my family, of society wants on me, because it starts with that, the projection of family and society, and then it goes into like who your mentor is, who you want to learn from. They'll start projecting their reality. So this fundamental projection of who you're meant to be is existent from the very beginning, right? Probably from your parents as the first people, right?
Yeah, I mean, they gave you a name and an identity the moment that you came out of the vagina. You didn't get to choose any of that.
It's true. So how do you break away from that? If like let's talk about, like, this is the way of, I guess, the way of self-actualization in a way, but how do you break away from this particular type of vortex people will catch you up in to project their reality?
I mean, there has to come a time in your life. So I spoke about these modalities of life and like the three main survival techniques, which is survival of the fittest, solidarity, and community. You have to engage in all three at some point in your life if you want to progress. You can't just rely on one technique, especially when you're in a society, because A society like Western society, for example, it employs all three of them. It's not just survival of the fittest, because you also see community programs. You see, quote unquote, what people call socialism and communism. But those policies and those ideologies already exist in society. As far as solidarity, you have businessmen who are just one-man armies. So it's more about looking at your surroundings, taking what you're learning from your surroundings and employing everything. So in this case, solidarity, just breaking away. When you're around someone, they're always going to tell you who you are better than you are, because that's what they're seeing. It might, you might have multiple friends and they're all going to give you a different reality of who they think you are based on what they've seen, based on what they've experienced with you. So the best way for you to figure out who you are is some alone time.
Yeah, I believed in traveling alone.
Yeah, like you have to break away from the herd. And a lot of people say it's like, no, we are social creatures. Yes, we are social creatures, but our existence is not predicated on that single aspect alone. We need to be able to survive for ourselves. So if we ever break from the pack, which is something that happens way more now, we got to be able to learn how to survive on our own. In America, for example, that's a big issue right now, which is creating what is the left and the right, the red and the blue. You have the people on the blue who are all about survival of the fittest, and you have people on the red who are all about community. They don't see eye to eye, because the people who are about survival of the fittest, they're not ready to share. They worked hard for their resources. They inherited all of this, their parents, whatever, so that they could have all of this. They're not going to be ready to give it up. And if you're a community survivor, it's like, well, you're not working hard enough. You're depending on your community. You're depending on everyone to do one thing in order for your existence to pan out. So you kind of have to look at both things. Those are the most extreme forms of life techniques that we use right now. So usually the remedy in that situation is to just break away from both of them and be an independent existence for a little bit. Break away, get lost. Get lost in this big world. Break your perception. Once, if you're someone who grew up in a society and you go to a third world country, the yoke of your heart, of your heart, is just going to burst open once you start seeing that the world is a fucked up place, and it's
Yep,
also
that's what happened
beautiful.
to me. That's what happened to me. Kashmir. For you, Guatemala or wherever else you've been. For me, it
Yeah,
was
like for me,
Kashmir.
I grew up over there, so my perception of the world was already that life was hard. That's what I realized within my first 5 years of life, and then I came to the United States and entered a pampered existence, and so I saw
Yeah,
myself come
I
into
liked the way you said that. Tampered existence. It's true.
I saw myself come into conflict with a lot of the things that I had already grown used to. Like, for example, why do we have to go to a market to buy food? Why can't we just put everything in our backyard? Because me growing up, all of the food that I ever wanted was in my grandmother's backyard. I could just
That's
go
mad.
find a specific fruit tree. If I wanted a coconut, just shake the fucking coconut tree. If we wanted chicken, there was a bunch of chickens running around. If there was a cow, we'd see which cow was about to die. Because that's another thing over there. Like, we don't just kill our cows. We wait for them to live, and then when they're gonna die, we let the whole
Well,
village
that's
know.
smarter. That's smarter. I
Yeah,
always
we let.
because like living in Kashmir is the same. Why would you kill your cow? Just get
Yeah,
as
it's
much
like we
milk as
we.
you can until it ages out, and then you get dry aged beef or whatever they
There you
call it.
go. Yeah, that's exactly what we do. We would let the cow live. They would live a normal existence. We'd take as much milk as we can when they weren't, when they didn't have multiple babies. We basically get what we can out of the cows, and then once they're ready to die, we let the whole village know, like, hey, this cow's gonna die. Let's have a ceremony for it tonight. The entire village gathers. We kill it. Everybody takes their piece. Nothing goes to waste. For me, I thought that was an ideal way of living, but then I came here. I had culture shock. I experienced very shitty people. I experienced
Well,
racism.
yeah. I want to get into that, okay? Because all right, so racism. All right, racism is such an interesting thing. Such an interesting thing because see, I'm mixed race. Okay, I'm
I think
half
most of
Greek,
us are.
half Kashmiri. Huh?
I think many of us are mixed race. We just don't want to acknowledge it.
Yeah. Well, I did a DNA ancestry. Um, and one thing that really stumped me about my race was that depending on where I was in the world, I would be perceived differently. So in Australia, we have a very well, in Sydney, we have very community-based type of races, right? So mainly because of how migration has happened. So first it was the Anglos, the whites, the ones that came at the very beginning when the convict colony was set up. Captain Cook, it was the late 1700s. And then after that, slowly more and more migrants came to build Australia. The Chinese came for the gold rush, but then the Southern Europeans came. And as we know, there's a distinct look and difference between the Northern Europeans and the Southern Europeans, or even the Anglo Europeans and whatnot. So Southern Europeans, we're talking, Greek, Spain, Italy, Portugal, those parts. They slowly came in. And my mother, she grew up as a Southern European in Anglo Australia, or White Australia, as they call it. There was a White Australia policy back then. Um, and she faced racism from a young age, right? Even though, she was European. Then we had people from the Middle East, from Asia, Southeast Asia, India, South America, all come, right? And slowly, slowly, they've integrated into society. Now, what happens is, because of that, Aussies have lived in more segregated communities. People stick within their own race, okay?
Right.
And there's that isolation. Now more and more so, people are integrating, especially in mobile workplaces. All that, people have been wise enough to be able to accept each other and integrate. But underlying in the fundamental structures of society, and this is, if I drive down the road, I'll go to a Korean suburb. If I drive on the other side, I'll go to a Lebanese suburb, right? This is what I'm saying. They're all segregated. And what ends up happening is the way people view race in Australia is that you must belong to these people. You must belong to these people. It's already innately there because of how the country's history is set out. Now, I can go to England or Europe, and suddenly I'm in Serbia and people think I'm Serbian because of maybe how I look. I'm in Greece, people think I'm Greece. I'm in Lebanon. Second I got there, people thought I was Lebanese. I was in Russia, people thought I was Russian because I looked like I was from the Caucasus. Um, so what I was saying was that people's perception of race changes wherever you go. Right? Even I've been told, I was in Qatar, Doha. These South African women were speaking with. They thought I was white because it's white by their standard, right? Because of what they've been through. So that's where
Right.
you actually start seeing there's an element of subjectivity of the perception of race and what type of race you are. That although there is some genetically biological way that your race has been formed and how you look, the perception of the people is subjective, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, man, it's a big world, and a lot of people don't realize that America or Australia or England, like those are small little freckles on the big ass world. If we even want to call it a world or a planet or a disc, whatever people see it as, it's big. And there's so many people, so many cultures. There's new cultures developing themselves right now, developing new ways to see people. Like biases are being formed left and right. It's the same thing in Guatemala. Like there is a higher emphasis on not so much racism against color, but racism in like, oh, what part of South America are you from? It's more like ethnicism. Because once you're white, it's like all white people look the same to us. Like you're super pale, light skin, and you can't absorb sunlight, you're white. That's it. It needs not be said like what part of the world you're from. If you can't absorb sunlight, you fall into this category. If you are, let's say, kids of like Guatemalans, but you're born in a different country, then you're called this. And then if you're someone from there, you're called this. And then if you're dark skinned, then you're just called a negro. But then if you're like a Latino, it's all about what part in South America or something. Like they start nitpicking, and that I find it silly because now that I'm here in America, I see that there's like a very fragmented white community. You have a homogenous white community, and you have these Caucasians who don't like to be associated with the common white person. It's almost like they see themselves as a person of color because now they're very integrated in the social issues of people of color, but really you just have like the black people here who have already been here. Then you have all of the other non-black but non-white people who are also here. And it's almost like the majority of people in America who are in that Caucasian bubble, for half of them, I want to say, they're in an identity crisis. They don't know where they belong, even though to us, for someone like me, like someone who's from the outside, I see you the same as them. Like you guys are one people, you're from the same genetic background. That's what I'm seeing. It's like you guys have the same genetic background. Maybe you overcame your genetic biases and the limitations that your parents gave you. Maybe you haven't, but that's the the ancestral struggle that you're coming from. This is the one that I'm coming from. This is the one that they're coming from. Looking at it from that perspective, you kind of take racism away from the picture, and it more becomes about how did we each evolve.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And this is where I found the whole DNA ancestry interesting thing interesting because I realized that I was not one race, and I already knew that when I was young. It was obvious, but like I had to internalize that. Do you know what I mean? There had to be an internalization of that for me to
Right, there
accept
was
that.
a reality shock, and you had
Yeah,
to
because
just
because it dictated how I looked. I'm really into bodybuilding as well, so it dictated how my body was going to look as well in terms of how I put on muscle. A lot of people don't realize that bodybuilding, a lot of it's genetics, a lot of it's race as well. You know, where did your family grow up to sustain a body or in an environment to sustain a body that was able to put on muscle? You know what I mean?
yeah,
That type of thing.
saying that, yeah, like you're saying that right now, and that's what I also try to convey. It's like, so I have a good example. A lot of Caucasian people tend to be more burly and bulky simply
Mhm.
because of the requirements for you to live in very cold mountainous regions requires you to be bigger and to be able to hold on to more fat, which by turn means that you can also have more muscle mass. Whereas if you grow up in a tropical environment, your body's going to be way more lean and way more primed to be able to get through the jungle very quickly. And that's very common. Like within my family, for example, all of my cousins were lean. We have a very hard time maintaining body fat,
Mhm.
but we're all very agile and we run through the forest like it's nothing. Whereas
Yeah,
if I
that
was to bring, whereas if I was to bring someone who's from America who has European roots, they're gonna suck in the jungle. But you take them out in the mountain, we like, let's say we all go hiking, they're gonna be the ones who are more resilient and more easily able to combat the cold. Meanwhile, me, who's from a tropical region, I'm gonna need like 6 parkas to just be on their level.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, because it even comes down to bone structure, height, bone density, all that type of stuff, and that is all being designed to serve people within the environments they've grown up in. You know what I mean? And people need to start really looking at these type of things when we talk about even fitness and sports and stuff. Um, for example, I've been doing bodybuilding for many years now, and I've had friends who I've grown up with that have gone on the same journey as me, started training around the same time I trained. And it's interesting to see how each and everybody's body has turned out to be different. That was the most fascinating thing after 10 years of training to look at one friend, look at another friend, then look at another, and look at how our bodies have all developed differently, if almost the same amount of training, right? And it really shows the maximization of the genetic potential of, but it all looks good in a different way. For example, my friend, he's around my height. He has a compact body, more like a gymnast body, right? Whereas I'm the same. I've done the same type of training, and I've developed more of a MMA boxer's body, fighter's body, which with more of a reach and stuff, with more flexibility. But it's so interesting to see that pattern happen, even though we stand at the same height and weight. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was probably one of the most phenomenal realizations that you can give anybody a fitness regime, fitness workout, any type of thing, but the way their body is going to develop and is going to be situationally based upon what would be ideal had they grown up in an environment based on their ancestry, right?
Yep.
And that's over thousands of years, not based on a Western country where you go down to the supermarket and get a fucking packet of fucking Cocoa Pops. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, that's the crazy thing about society is that if you grow up in a society, you never even consider thinking about these small details because to you, you've been told that everything works this way. So this vaccine is going to affect everybody the same way. This diet is going to work for everybody, even though it has cheese. And this group of people have not developed the enzyme to metabolize cheese. So forget them, but just listen to the science. So that's kind of what we're noticing here. So one of the things that I realized as I was growing up, because I grew up predominantly with Blacks and Latinos. I started meeting Caucasian people when I moved to Florida for the first time. So that for me was a reality pop, and I was just like, why do you guys look so pale? I've never met a Caucasian before. Um, but different lifestyles, different.
Yeah, it is. It's the same, here growing up, it was very different. We very multicultural. Sydney became very multicultural, especially in the 90s. You had a lot more migrants coming in, all different stories, all different backgrounds.
And yeah, and
And
so the nutritional sciences that we had available at the time, they had never really been revised.
no, it
So,
hadn't, because it tried to apply one set fundamentals to all people, which
mm-hmm.
doesn't work. I can say in my experience, it doesn't work. What I eat, how often I can train is so different. Um,
Point
and
in case, the whole struggle right now between eating meat versus veganism, I always tell people, look at your ancestry before you subscribe to any of that, because you might fuck yourself over. And I have a lot of Caucasian friends who, lo and behold, have a problem metabolizing things like fruits and vegetables because their ancestors have not been exposed to those things. They've been relying primarily on meats, on cheeses, breads, grains. That has been the bulk of their diet. And if you don't take into account those things, you're going to try to subscribe to a diet which you can't even process. And that's just going to start leading to problems. And then you're going to be that person who comes onto MSM and is starting to say, oh, veganism doesn't work. Here's why. And it's like, it doesn't work
that's
for
your life.
you.
That's
It
your
doesn't
life.
work for you.
That's your life.
And
Exactly.
that's what I try to tell a lot of vegans. It's like, my ancestry and my genetics calls for me to eat meat. This is how we've been living. We've been living on meats and fruits. When I try to eat vegetables, it gets a little weird because we aren't crazy with vegetables, but meats and fruits, my body loves those. My body sings on that diet. It thrives. There's no hiccup, no bumps, no problems. But once I start playing with all these other things, it's like, ooh.
Yeah, it's this is where the beauty of life is, experimenting with your body and how it works. Even my eating patterns, like I changed my eating patterns over the years, and it took me years. It took me years to work out the best eating pattern for training. It took me so many years, man. I mean, it's a journey in itself. But you know what? It's coming to about 1 hour. We've really had a lot to discuss, and I'm sure we'll have to do another one again, because there was a lot of topics to discuss. Um, so a few takeaways from today's podcast, Ignis. One, don't subscribe to people's ideas and philosophies, because your way of life and the way you were built, whether genetically from an upbringing or whatnot, is going to be different. And it's just what you
Right.
just said, whether it's your diet choices, what you choose to believe. You have to accept that you as an individual as a whole is different based on many different factors. What else would you like to add for today's close to finish off?
Well, everybody in this world is unique, just like everyone else. There's no one existence that's going to have all of the answers for anybody else. It's a journey. Find out what happens in your journey. Stay tuned for everything. It's going to happen in your journey. If someone else comes to you and they tell you that they have a solution for you, a solution for something that you're going to experience in your journey, that is the same thing as having your wallet stolen and someone saying, hey, I found your wallet, except they took out all of your money.
Yeah, and and
So
in that
if somebody needs to sell you a philosophy, if they need to sell you a self-help idea, if they need to sell you anything that you would normally pick up on your journey, you're being fooled. And it's easier to be fooled than convince somebody that they've been fooled.
exactly, and this is why we need to be self-aware of ourselves, focus on this way of self-actualizing, where we need to note that all the information we're taking in may or may not be beneficial depending on who you are. And I have sent you a video of my System 333 trailer that I put out 2 years ago, so you can take a watch, because it really highlights what we've spoken about today, that the map of reality for the age of information is what
It requires a very healthy and practical level of skepticism. And
exactly.
if
And
you are not skeptical in the day of today, oh, you're going to be an easy target for manipulation.
yeah, you'll get sold. You'll get sold. Well, man,
And
thanks
that,
so.
yeah.
Now, I appreciate you coming on the show. How can people reach out to you?
Right now, the only form of social media that I am keeping is Facebook. I've deleted everything else because like social media kind of ties into this whole thought storm and misinformation war that we're in because there's just so much exposure to this loop where it's like you discover new information, so that throws off little signals in your head that you're doing something, and then you go share it with somebody else, and then people don't realize that they're caught up in this cycle where they're just sharing terrible information with each other and leaving themselves anxious, depressed, hyper alert, and paranoid. So it's like, take a step back, breathe, observe, and be skeptical. If somebody tries to tell you who you are, that's a red flag.
Yeah, and they don't know any better because they don't know themselves. So
Right.
they
Discover who you are for yourself. That's all it is. That's all it's going to take.
that's it. Well, we'll have you on the show again. I appreciate it. I got to jump on line to work now, but it's been really awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show. There's a lot of takeaways today, and we'll hope you have a great it's Sunday night for you, isn't it? So hope you have a great
Yeah.
week.
Thanks, brother. Likewise. Same to you, man.